All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Steve and Terry Zinn, for dedicating all the Shumer Drushos this month in loving memory of Steve's father, Albert Zinn Bunin Tzvi Ben Chaim Zichron Livracha. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, and the schos of continued health for Shulamis Chana Bas Susha, and for an enduring refuah shalima. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas and aliyah, the families in Nechama, all those who need a refuah, should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. The Kadosh Baruch Hu should Eretz Hashem continue to shower bracha and besoros tovos upon all of Klal Yisrael this week and for many weeks to come. But with that, let us begin. We have a great daf ahead of us today. A lot to do today. A lot of information, Baruch Hashem, and in Eretz Hashem, the conclusion of the parak. In Meretz Hashem B'Shar Tovo U'Mitzlachas. So today's daf is daf Nun Zayin 57. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Nun Vav Amud Beis 56b at the Mishnah. So a really interesting sugya. HaBachar v'HaMaiser v'HaPesach. So Bachar, Maiser and Pesach. So again, we're going to go through each of these karbanos. Bachar is the firstborn animal that is given to the Kohen. Maiser is Maiser Behema, right? Remember again, I have an obligation to tithe my flock, and Maiser Behema also. And Maiser Behema. So look at Rashi. So yeah, Maiser Behema. Pesach is Karban Pesach. All of these are examples of Kachim Kalim. All of these are examples of what we call lower sanctity karbanos. What's the halacha? Shchitasim b'tzafam. Shchitasim b'chomakom. Shchitasim b'chomakom ba'azara. So ultimately, again, you could shech them anywhere in the azara, anywhere in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. V'damon ton matana achos. And the halacha is that they require one blood application. So both says, remember again, we saw this already by Kachim Kalim already earlier. We saw the same idea by Chatas Achitzon, that there's only an obligation of one blood application. Now, the Bechatas Achitzon is an obligation of 4, but if you only did one, you're Yotze. So you require only one blood application. Now, interestingly enough, Halacha l'maisa, although it is one blood application, obilvad sheyitin keneged hayisod. Now, both say the halacha is you only need one blood application, but you have to do it on a corner that has a yisod. I forgot I didn't basically make this picture on, but it's okay. We'll just do it on this for now. So remember again, as we've already established multiple times. So on the Beis Hamikdash, 2 out of the 3 sides, right, have a yisod. So the western side and ultimately again the northern side have the yisod, have the base, right? Remember again, just to get our terms again. So there is the yisod, which is the base, which is on ground level, and then there is the sovev, which is the ledge, which is elevated, that allows the kohen access to the blood applications on the corner. So the halacha is like this: kachim kalim, lower sanctity karbanos, only require blood application ultimately again on one blood application. And you could do it, you have a choice on which corner you want, but it has to be a corner that has a, oh, Shalom, it's all right, thank you. It's okay, fine. If you already brought it, I'll use it. All right, incredible, thank you. So remember again, now I have to get out the pointer, it triggers the whole zachal here. Okay, good. So remember, yeah, sorry. Did you whistle at me? Did you just whistle at me? Was that a whistle? Okay. Save that for the puppy. Yeah, save that for the puppy. All right. So again. So remember again. So the halacha is like this. So remember, just to get our idea. So kachim kalim. The halacha is you could check it anywhere in the azara, right? Anywhere over here. You could go ahead and good. Talmud Tamatana Achas, one blood application, as long as it is opposite an area with the yisod, which means this side, so west or north. Good. So the Gemara says, Shina Bachilasa. Now, each of these karbanos, interestingly enough, as much as all of them are called Kachim Kalim, remember again, all of them have different consumption windows. As we're now, the most obvious of that is Kara Pesach. Also, remember again, we spoke about yesterday this idea of a of a shlamim that normally, for example, the window of consumption for shlamim is how long? What's your window for consumption for shlamim? 2 days, 1 night. Well done. 2 days, 1 night. Now, just to give an example of a shlamim that only has 1 day and 1 night is Karban Pesach. Right? Karban Pesach is in the shlamim family. You only get 1 day, 1 night. The truth is, we're going to talk about Karban Pesach. Emir Hashem on Amud Beis today. Very exciting way to end off the parak. So Shina Bakilas. So as much as all of these karbanos are called Kodshim Kalim, they do have different durations of consumption. For example, Sigmar goes on. Now, even in these Kodshim Kalim, these karbanos are consumed by different people. So, for example, the Bechar is given to the Kohen and consumed by the Kohen. Meiser Behema, ultimately again, can be consumed by anyone. And ultimately again, all of Kodshim Kalim, in general, Kodshim Kalim can be consumed anywhere in Yerushalayim. Very important. Bechol Ma'achal, and you can prepare it any way you want. You prepare it any way you want. In other words, there's no restriction on how you eat it. We'll see exceptions in just a moment. And in general, the window of consumption for Kodshim Kalim is 2 days and 1 night. So, for example, if I shechted on a Monday, I could eat it Monday night, and Tuesday up until sunset on Tuesday. Now, of course, the exception to this is HaPesach. So, of course, it's Karban Pesach. I both say Karban Pesach is unique. Now, what makes it unique is that halacha l'maisa again, even though you shecht Karban Pesach by day, remember, you can't eat it until that night. That's very unique. You don't find that, by the way, say with any other karban, right? You don't find that. You shecht it by day and can't eat it until that night. That's Karban Pesach. Furthermore, Karban Pesach could only be consumed until midnight. So a number of peculiarities when it comes to Karban Pesach. Number one, even though you're shechting it by day, you can't eat it until that night. Number two, you can only eat it until midnight. Furthermore, it can only be consumed to the people who are part of the Chabura. As a little Karban Pesach review, right? Halacha l'maisa, in order to participate in Karban Pesach, you have to be part of a Chabura. You have to be part of a group that's an already established group, again, prior to the time of Shechita. And furthermore, you can only eat it if it's roasted. So again, even though Karban Pesach is part of the Kodshim Kalim, even though it's part of the Kodshim Kalim family, you do have all of these different restrictions ultimately on the karban. Incredible, I will say. So that's our Mishnah by Kodshim Kalim. Beautiful. So I will say, so just a quick review. All of these karbanos in the category of Kodshim Kalim, what's the halacha? You could check them anywhere on the Azara. They require 1 blood application, and the only din in that blood application ultimately is that it's on the side of the Mizbeach that has a yesod, that has a base. Then after that, even though they're all Kodshim Kalim, they have different halachas. Good. Says the Gemara, Mantana. Who is the opinion? Who is the author of our Mishnah? Now, what is the Gemara exactly asking? If you look at Rashi, it's the last 2 wide lines in Rashi. Mantana, Meiser uPesach Bezrika. Excuse me. Meiser uPesach Bezrika. V'Rashi Matan Dam Bechar. So we'll say, if you notice, what's interesting over here is the Mishnah. The Mishnah equates Bechar, Meiser, and Pesach. Right? So Bechar is the giving over of the firstborn animal to the Kohen. Meiser Behema is tithing of your animals, 10th animal, and Karban Pesach. So the Gemara is equating the Mishnah is equating all 3 of these karbanos. The Gemara asks, who is the Tana who says that Meiser Behema and Karban Pesach is like Bechar, is likened to Bechar? Who is that opinion? So the Gemara says, Amrav Chista, Rabbi Yosef Lili. It's Rabbi Yosef Lili. What does Rabbi Yosef Lili say? Disanya, Rabbi Yosef Lili, Omer, Chelbo lo ne'emar, Ella Chelbam. Damolo ne'emar ella damam. Okay, so what are you talking about over here? The passage we're talking about is ach bechar shar o bechar kesef o bechar eis lo sifde kodeshem es damam tizrak al mizbeach ve'es chalbam taktir ishereach nichach lashem. So also it's her speaking about over here bechar behema and talking about again the bechar of a shar, an ox, bechar kesef, a sheep, or bechar eis, a goat. So it's interesting, in the pasuk it says their chelev, right, plural, their fats, plural, their blood, plural. So what does the plurality of the pasuk teach? Rabbi Yosef says, limeid al bechar u'meiser u'pesach shetu'unin matan damim ve'imur legav mizbeach. So Rabbi Yosef Lili understands that the plurality of the pasuk is coming to include not just bechar, but it's coming to include these other items that are in the Kodshim Kalim family, namely Meiser Behema. Meiser Behema and Pesach. That they require blood applications and the burning of sacrificial parts on the Mizbeach. Incredible. The Gemara says, "Keneged hayisod minalan." Fine. So I understand the commonality between all three of these things. So Bechar, Meiser Behema, and Pesach are all learned out of the pasuk of Bechar, to teaching that just as Bechar requires the blood application and sacrificial parts burnt on the Mizbeach, so too does Meiser Behema and Pesach. Good. Next detail. Remember, we require one blood application. How do I know that it has to be on the side of the Mizbeach that has the Yesod, that has the base? Where do I know that? From Amram Belazar, Asya, Zrika, Me'ola. We learn out of Gzera Shava, ultimately again of Zrika, from Ola. Fine. So the Gemara says, apparently, just like Ola only requires one blood application, but requires it on a side of the Mizbeach that has a ledge, so too again, these other karbanos also require one blood application, but require it on a side that has a ledge. Top of Nun Zayin 57a, V'Ola Gufa Minalan, but Ola itself, where do I know that Ola requires one blood application, and on this, one of the blood applications is the pasuk. But how do I know that Allah requires it on a side of the Mizbeach that has a ledge, that has a Yesod? T'chsiv a Yesod Mizbach ha'ola. So the pasuk says, to the base of the Mizbeach of the Ola. Limeid al Ola schova shetuuna Yesod. You see from here that halacha l'maisa, that with the Ola, ultimately again you require one blood application, and it requires it on a side that has a Yesod, a base. Says the Gemara, 1 second, but Ola doesn't require one blood application. Ola requires two. In fact, again, Ima lahalon shtei matanos shehin arba, afkan shtei matanos shehin arba. Well, 1 second. If you're going to learn out the obligation for Yesod, right, that the blood application has to be on the side of the Mizbeach that has a ledge, then again, why not complete the limud to Ola? Ola requires, Rabbosai, shtei matanos shein arba. What does that mean, shtei matanos shein arba? So remember again, matana achas shishtayim, which then becomes shtei matanos shein arba, means you're sprinkling on a corner of the horn, a corner of the corner of the horn, corner of the keren, which then essentially spritzes on two sides of the horn. So it's one blood application that becomes two. So if you're learning this out from Ola, then why not say, just like Ola requires matana achos shehi shtayim, two that are four, so too these other kabbalas will also require two which are four. To which the Gemara says, Afkan shtei matana shein arba, Amar Abaye lama li lemichtav saviv ba'ola, saviv b'chatos. Tzuro says very good. So Abaye says, let's take a step back. Why does the Torah have to say saviv by ola and saviv by chatos? Right, the lashon of the pasuk is v'nasan hakohen min adam al karnos mizbach hakitores hasamim lifnei Hashem asher ba'ol hamoed ve'es dam hapar yishboch ayisod mizbach ha'ola asher pesach ha'ol hamoed. So why do you have to say saviv? Why do you have to say? Sorry, I read the wrong pasuk. Next pasuk. V'shachar es ben abakar lifnei Hashem ve'krivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es adam v'zarko es adam hamizbech saviv. So why does it have to say saviv by ola, which means around? Now we'll say saviv generally means, in these two contexts, ultimately again, it's shtei matanos shein arba. It's two blood applications that are four. But it calls it saviv because effectively what ends up happening, you end up going ahead and getting it around the Mizbeach. So the Gemara says, why does it say saviv by ola, saviv by chatos? Havu shnei ksuvin habayin ke'echad. Ultimately, again, I will say, what does that show you? That is shtei matanos. That is shnei ksuvin habayin ke'echad. But say this principle says that in general, if the Torah states something once, that is to teach you an overarching principle. If the Torah states something twice, it is to tell you that this is the exception and not the rule. So it says saviv by ola, it says saviv by chatos. What is that? So look at Rashi just a moment. Saviv by chatos, b'miluim u'ba'ola misaviv shaminan bei dalid matanos shesoviv b'dama dalid ruchos b'mizbeach. So ultimately, again, and this happens to be talking about the saviv by chatas hamiluim and by ola. So again, it was dalid matanos, four blood applications. It's shnei ksuvin habayin ke'echad, v'chol shnei ksuvin habayin ke'echad in malamdin. And ultimately, again, anytime the Torah states something twice, Halacha l'maaseh, it's to teach you that these are the exceptions and not to create the overarching rule. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, in Malandin, v'afagav dehacha lav binyan av, anu ba'in lilmod ashmin abaye, the shnei ksuvin abayin ke'echad, ein Malandin, afilu b'gzera shava. So therefore, I will say ultimately, again, both of these cases of Ola and Chatos essentially became Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad. And therefore, even though, I just want to point out what's happening over here, even though I'm going ahead and learning out Zrika from Ola, so I'm learning out the obligation that the blood application by these other karbanos, namely again, Bechar, Meiser, Pesach, has to be Keneged Hayisod, has to go ahead and be on a side of the Mizbeach that has a ledge, that has a base. Ultimately, I'm not learning the number of blood applications. Why? Because when it comes to the number of blood applications, these are Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad. The Torah states these blood applications twice, which means that they cannot serve as a rule. That's fine according to the opinion that says that Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad, you cannot go ahead and learn out from it. But I will say that statement itself is a contested concept. Not everybody agrees to it. So what do you say? The Gemara says, Asham, Havi Asham Shlosha, Ushlosha Vade Malamdin. Because the truth is, Rabbi say, the Torah actually states the principle 3 times. Once by Ola, once by Chatas, and once by Asham. So apparently, even if you hold Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad Malamdin, even if you hold that way, everyone agrees, Shlosha Ksuvin Habayin Ke'echad in Malandin. And therefore, again, they have a concept stated 3 times, therefore it does not serve as a paradigm for anything else. Good. They will say, what's our takeaway? What's our takeaway? So our takeaway, remember again, we're dealing with Kachim Kalim, specifically 3 karbanos, Bechar, firstborn animal given to the Kohen, Meiser Behema, the 10th animal, and ultimately Karban Pesach. Kam denominator, all of these are Kachim Kalim. So the first nugget of information that we have established is that Allah Chalamaysa, they require 1 blood application. Remember again, where is the blood application being done? On the exterior Mizbeach, what we call the Mizbeach HaOla. Mizbeach HaOla Shechita is anywhere in the Azara. And ultimately, what we've established is the 1 blood application, you have a choice where you want to do it. It just has to be on a side of the Mizbeach that has a Yesod, right? So which is going to be, again, either our western or our northern side. Beautiful. That's our first nugget of information. Next. Habachar nechal kohanim. I will say in general, when you have a firstborn animal, what do I do with that firstborn animal? I give that to the Kohen. That's one of the matnos kuna, one of the Kohanic gifts. So says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan minayin lebachar shnechal l'shnei yamim belayla. So I'll say, so first let's go back for just a second, because remember, we also established in the Mishnah that the normal duration for consumption of kachim kalim is 2 days and 1 night. 2 days and 1 night. So just in general, the Gemara says, how do you know that? Right? From where do we know that a bachar is consumed for 2 days and 1 night? To which the Gemara says, Shne'emar ubsaram yelecha ki chazeh hatnufa ukishok hayamin. Because the pasuk says that its meat will be for you, literally again like the chest and the thigh. Hikishu akasav lechazeh v'shok. Shal shlamim. The Torah compares bachar ultimately again to the chest and thigh of a shlamim. Ma shlamim nechal l'shnei yom v'layla echad. Just like shlamim, as we established yesterday, is consumed for 2 days and 1 night. Af bechar nechal l'shnei yom v'layla echad. So very simple. It's a comparison between bechar and shlamim. Shlamim is consumed for 2 days and 1 night, and therefore bechar will be consumed for 2 days and 1 night. So I'll say it's a great Gemara. V'zu she'ela nishala l'fnei chacham b'kerem b'yavneh. And this question about the duration of the consumption of a bachar came up in Keren B'Yavneh. I remember again, we saw that before. What's Keren B'Yavneh? So this is Yavneh is one of the locations where the Sanhedrin, when the Sanhedrin was exiled from the Lishkas HaGazis. Remember again, Abba says, you've seen Lishkas HaGazis is right here. This is the chamber where normally, again, the Sanhedrin would sit. When they were exiled to a variety of different places. One of them was in Yavneh. Yavneh was also, even before then, Yavneh was the site of a great yeshiva, and they would sit like in rows, arranged like a vineyard. Hence the name Kerem, the vineyard in Yavneh. So this question came up in Yavneh, in the yeshiva in Yavneh. Rashi says over here, Tamdi Chacham Yoshin Shuros Kekerem, Kach Mefurish Rachas Yerushalmi. So what happened? So one time they were sitting in the yeshiva in Yavneh, and they asked, Bechar Lekama Ne'echal. Ultimately, the shaila came up in the base medrash. what is the duration of consumption for a bachar? How long can you eat the bachar for? So listen to this. Nana Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon got up and he said, Va'amar l'shnei yamim v'layla echad, 2 days and 1 night. That's the duration for bachar behema. So the Gemara says, Hayishan tam decha. Listen to this great story. Hayishan tam decha shebala beis hamedrash. That day there was a new student in the beis medrash. And what was his name? So the Gemara says, Shabbat beis medrash Zevachim tchila. What was his name? Rabbi Yosef Lili Shmo. His name was Rabbi Yosef Lili. So this shaila comes up in the beis medrash. What is the duration of consumption for bachar behema? And what happened? That happened to have been Rabbi Yossi Haglili's first day in the beis medrash. So Amar Lo, Rabbi Minayin Lecha, Rabbi Yossi Haglili says to Rabbi Tarfon. So Yossi Haglili is the new student. Rabbi Tarfon is the seasoned sage. So he says to Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi, where do you know that from? Right? Where do you know? Where do you know that halacha l'maisa? That halacha l'maisa, you can eat bachar behema for 2 days and 1 night. Amar Lo, B'ni. I'll tell you why. So listen to this. Rabbi Tarfon says to Rabbi Yosef Lili, my son, I will explain this to you. Shlamim kachim kalim, or bachar kachim kalim. So shlamim ultimately is kachim kalim, as we just saw. Bachar is kachim kalim. So ma shlamim ne'echad l'shnei v'layla echad. Af bachar ne'echad l'shnei l'shayla echad. So Rabbi Tarfon is very simple, very simple. Bachar is part of the category of shlamim. Just like we know that shlamim are consumed for 2 days and 1 night, so too bachar is consumed for 2 days and 1 night. Pretty pashut and straightforward. Amar Lo Rabbi, so Rabbi Yosef Lili argues, and he says, Rabbi, 1 second, bachar matar lekoin, v'chatas v'asha matar lekoin. I can say a little bit opposite. Bachar, right? Bachar behema is one of the matnos, one of the gifts you give to the kohen, and chatas and asham also is a gift to the kohen. Now, what does that mean? Chatas and asham ultimately, again, are given to the kohen. So I just want to point something out. Chatas and asham, there's part of it that is burnt on the mizbeach, and there's part of it that's consumed. But the part that is consumed is not consumed by the owners. It is only consumed by the kohanim, as opposed to shlamim. Let's say a carbon shlamim. So shlamim, ultimately, part of it is consumed to the mizbeach, part of it is given to the kohanim, and part of it is given to the owners. So listen to this. So remember again, so we're trying to figure out what's the window of consumption for a bachar. Rabbi Tarfon says very simply, bachar is part of the shlamim framework. Shlamim is consumed for 2 days and 1 night, and therefore bachar is consumed for 2 days and 1 night. So Rabbi Tarfon says, hold up. Shlamim is a gift ultimately again to the kohanim. Sorry, bachar. Bachar is a gift to the kohanim. Chatas and asham is also like a gift to the kohanim, in that only kohanim eat it, no one else does. So why don't you say the following? Ma chatas va'asham, we'll say first white line, then zayin, with Aleph 57a. Ma chatas va'asham liyom v'layla. Just like chatas and asham, we'll say, are only consumed for 1 day and 1 night. So if I shech the chatas and an asham today on Monday, I eat it on Monday through Monday night. And then come dawn on Tuesday, I can't eat it anymore. Af bechar liyom v'layla. So too bechar should only be consumed for 1 day and 1 night. Solid, right? So Rabbi Tarfon is saying, I understand the comparison. You're comparing it to the rest of shlamim, but I would compare it to other matnos kuna, other kohanic gifts. Amar Lo, so to which Rabbi Tarfon responded, Nidon davar mitoch davar, v'nilmod davar mitoch davar. Let's learn out, essentially, let's go ahead and let's take bachar, and let's go ahead and be done it. Let's adjudicate it. Let's extrapolate this information from something else, and learn out from something else. So the Gemara says, Mash shlamim, ein ba'in al chet, af bachar ein ba al chet. So to which Rabbi Tarfon responds, and he says, I don't understand. Your comparison between bachar, chatas, and asham doesn't make any sense. Why? Because chatas and asham come as a result of sin. Bachar has nothing to do with sin. Because it has nothing to do with sin, it makes more sense to compare it to shlamim than it does to compare it to chatas and asham. Okay, so therefore again, therefore I go back to my original comparison. I think it makes more sense to compare bachar to regular shlamim, just like shlamim is consumed for 2 days and 1 night, so too bachar is consumed for 2 days and 1 night. Beautiful. That's Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Yosef is not going to let go, and he says as follows: Amar Lo Rebbe. I will say, by the way, what's very beautiful about this is, what do you see about this exchange? What do you see about it? it's very deferential and respectful, right? If you notice again, when Rabbi Yosef literally poses his question, he says Rabbi, and if you notice again when Rabbi Tarfon initially responds, he says Bini. I will say this is dialoguing with dignity. This is disagreeing with dignity. And again, I will say one could imagine that in the midst of the yeshiva, remember again also, this is Rabbi Yosef Lili's first day in yeshiva. Generally, first day in yeshiva, what do you do? What do you do? Nothing, right? Just blend in. But again, the beauty of this is that when you dialogue with dignity and when you disagree with dignity, it's okay, it's beautiful. Because remember, what is everyone striving for? I will say the goal over here is not to see who's right. The goal over here ultimately is to go ahead and arrive at the MS. And when everyone is devoted to MS, when everyone is devoted to figuring out what is the ultimate good, disagreement is not only okay, but it's beautifully welcome as well. It's just such a model that so often escapes us. So the Gemara says, Amrlo. So therefore again, Rabbi Yosef Lili is not letting go. Amrlo, Rabbi, Nidon davar midavar, Yilmod davar midavar. So Rabbi Yosef Lili says to Rabbi Tarfon, he says, Rabbi, I agree with you, but I think we can extrapolate from a different source. Watch this. Chatas va'asha matana l'kohen, ubechar matana l'kohen. Again, I'm still going to stick to my guns over here, and I still feel that the comparison from Bechar to Chatas and Asham is still a better comparison than from Bechar to Shlamim. Why? Just like Chatas and Asham are a matana, are a gift to the Kohen. What does that mean? And that the Kohen gets to eat from those karbanos. Ubechar matana l'Kohen. And Bechar is also a gift given to the Kohen. Therefore, machatas va'asham ein ba'in b'neder unedava. And say, listen to this. Just like chatas, I will say, you can't bring chatas or asham as a neder and a dava, right? There's no such thing as a voluntary sin offering, which makes sense. Sin offerings are triggered by sinful behavior. You can't bring a voluntary sin offering. So to af bechar eino b'neder unedava. Interestingly enough, on Bechar also, you can't bring, again, Bechar will say is a function of a firstborn animal. You can't bring a voluntary Bechar. Therefore, so you see what Rabbi Yosef Lili is doing? He's strengthening, he feels, I really feel that Bechar is much more comparable to Chatas and Asham than it is just the Stam Shlamim. And therefore, Machatas va'asham ne'achalim liyom echad, just like Chatas and Asham are consumed for one day and one night, Af Bechar ne'achal the Yom Echad. So to Bechar is also going to be consumed for one night. So therefore I will say they're pretty much deadlocked, right? Again, both advancing very compelling arguments. Rabbi Tarfon's argument comparing Bechar to Shlamim, just like Shlamim gets 2 days and one night, so to Bechar gets 2 days and one night. And Rabbi Yosef Lili comparing Bechar to Chatas and Asham. Just like Chatas and Asham get 1 day and one night, so to Bechar should get 1 day and one night. So they will say, they're deadlocked. They're deadlocked. So it's great. Who jumps in? Kafats. Literally again, jump. We'll say it's great. Kafats Rabbi Akiva. Kafats Rabbi Akiva. Finistalik Rabbi Tarfon. Actually, it's so what happens. It's almost as if like Rabbi Akiva came in and like he tagged out Rabbi Tarfon. You know, like he's like Kafats Rabbi Akiva. Finistalik Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon left. He left, which is also just very an interesting lashon, which is essentially Rabbi Tarfon put forward his arguments like this. We'll say there's something very beautiful here. Sometimes, when we get into a debate or a discussion, so there's a tremendous Yetzer Hara. What's the Yetzer Hara? The Yetzer Hara is sometimes the most important thing to us becomes what? Being right. So sometimes, if your goal is to be right, it's fascinating. What happens when people when the goal is just to be right? What occurs? You just make stuff up. Right? It's my Simcha Yom. People they make stuff up, they twist information. There's a real, I think that's what nostalgic means. Rabbi Tarfon advanced his arguments. This is what I have. This is what I got, right? This is the information I have. I got it. Rabbi Yosef Lili, the new guy, is putting forward some good information. I have nothing new to offer on this, right? My entire argument is based on the construct that Bechar resembles Shlamim. That's it. Okay. And I hear what Rabbi Yosef Lili is saying. Rabbi Yosef is saying, but I can make a cogent argument to say that Bechar really resembles Chatas and Asham. Rabbi Tarfon says, I put forward my argument. I have nothing more to say. I'm not going to make stuff up or invent stuff just to be right. Nostalgic Rabbi Tarfon. We'll say it's godless. It's godless. This is what a machlokes lishma looks like, right? There's no name calling, right? There's no aggression. There's no nastiness. It's literally it's a discussion for the sake of arriving at MS. And once you have nothing more to say, nistalik, who jumps in? Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo, harehu omer, ubisaram yelecha. So the pasuk says, the flesh shall be for you. Hikishan hakasav. So we'll say this, by the way, Rabbi Akiva now advances the argument that we actually started the sugya with. So Rabbi Akiva says, 1 second, Rabbi Yosef Lili, you're wrong. The pasuk says, B'saram yelecha. Hikishan hakasav lechazei v'shok shel shlamim. The Torah equates bachar with the chest and the thigh of shlamim. Ma shlamim ne'echalim l'shnayam v'layla echad. Af bachar ne'echal l'shnayam v'layla echad. So we'll say, essentially what Rabbi Akiva comes along and says and brings a pasuk. He says the pasuk itself equates bachar with the chazei v'shok, with the chest and the thigh of shlamim. Chest that shlamim can be consumed for 2 days and 1 night. So too bachar can be consumed for 2 days and 1 night. Amar lo, hikash the chazei v'shok shel shlamim. So again, Rabbi Yosef Lili is not backing down. Rabbi Yosef says, Rabbi Akiva, I hear you are equating bachar to the chest and the thigh of shlamim. Vani makisho lechazei v'shok shel toda. Wow. So I'll say, Rabbi Yosef Lili, new guy's really making a lot of waves first day. So I'll say, so what happens? So Rabbi Yosef Lili says, listen, if you want to compare it to chazei v'shok, to the chest and the thigh, and you're comparing it to the chest and the thigh of shlamim, I could compare it to the chest and the thigh of carbon toda. And they'll say, ma toda ne'echalas the yom v'layla. The yom v'layla. So a carbon toda, interestingly enough, as big of a carbon as it is, could only be consumed for 1 day and the following night. Af bechar ne'echal liyom v'layla. So to bechar could only be consumed for 1 day and 1 night. Amar lo, to which Rabbi Akiva responds, harehu omer ubsaram yelecha, shein tamal omer lecha. Paz doesn't have to say lecha. Lecha yeh. Uma tamal omer lecha yeh. Hosif hakosef havia achas bebechar. The Torah, so there's an extra phrase of lecha yiyeh, shall be for you. Rabbi Akiva essentially says there's an extra for you. What's the extra for you? So both say, here's what's interesting. Everyone is agreeing that for sure, what's the minimum duration you can eat a bechar? What's the minimum duration? Minimum duration, 1 day, 1 night, right? Everyone is agreeing with that. Rabbi Akiva posits the extra lecha yiyeh means it will be yours for an extra period. What's the extra period? An additional day. Now, that's not Rabbi Akiva's primary argument, right? His primary argument is really as was espoused before. But Allah says, even according to you, Rabbi Yosef Lili, you have to admit that there is an extra lecha yihiyah. What is the extra lecha yihiyah? Adds on one additional period of consumption, an extra day, which makes it 2 days and 1 night. So Gemara says, Shnemru dvarim lifnei Rabbi Shmuel. And when they said, so we'll say, so fascinating machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon on one side, and Rabbi Yosef Lili on the other side. So Rabbi Shmuel, so let's listen to this, it's incredible. When they came before Rabbi Shmuel, they told this whole thing over before Rabbi Shmuel. And Rabbi Shmuel said to them, Su'u v'amru Rabbi Akiva, ta'isa. It's incredible. So Rabbi Shmuel says, go back and tell Rabbi Akiva, you made a mistake. You made a mistake. What's the mistake? Toda mehechen landa. Where is Toda learned out from? Mishlamim. This is very interesting. Toda is learned out from Shlamim. And they will say, now remember again, Davar halami behekish, chodrum la behekish. So we'll say, there's a little bit of we had this, right? So since Toda is learned out from Shlamim, it's learned out by hekish. Something learned out from a hekish can then, what we'll say, not go ahead and be utilized as the source of a hekish to something else. We spent a lot of time on this concept. Ha'in alecha lidon b'lashon acher, ella b'lashon rishon. Therefore, again, there's no reason for you to go past anything that we said before. Abosai, again, halacha l'maisas, Rabbi Shmuel essentially said, let's go back to the original limud. What was the original limud? The pasuk says, "Ubsaram yelecha kechazei atnufa k'shok atshuma." The pasuk ultimately, again, k'shok hayamin. Sorry, the pasuk ultimately equates bechar to the chazei and shok to the chest and the thigh of shlamim. Just like shlamim is consumed for 2 days and 1 night, so too bechar is consumed for 2 days and 1 night. So Rabbi Shmuel says the real limud is the way we started. Ultimately, again, there's a comparison between, there's a hekish between bechar and shlamim, and therefore, just like shlamim is consumed for 2 days and 1 night, so too bechar is consumed for 2 days and 1 night. So we'll say, so again, so just before we go on, because the Gemara is going to launch to a little bit of a tangent over here, that is the halacha. That is the halacha. So as much as we had this raging machlokes between Rabbi Yosef Lili and Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, halacha l'maisa, the window of consumption for a bachar is learned out from shlamim, just like shlamim is 2 days and 1 night, bachar is 2 days and 1 night as well. Bottom line, good. Rabbi Shmuel, hay lecha yeh my avidlei. So what does Rabbi Shmuel do with that lecha yeh that we darshan before? So ultimately, that lecha yeh tells us that even a blemished bachar that is not offered up on the mizbeach becomes the property of the Kohen. Shalom atzilin b'chol Torah kula, b'chol Torah, because this concept is not taught anywhere else in the Torah. Rabbi Akiva, where does Rabbi Akiva? So we'll say, by the way, I just want to point out why this is interesting. You might have thought, well, let's finish this up. Rabbi Akiva, yalef le mibsaram. Rabbi Akiva ultimately learns this out from B'saram, Chad Tam B'chad Baum, to teach me that whether the Bechar is blemished or whether it's unblemished, so obviously if it's unblemished, it's going to be offered up as a carbon. If it's blemished, it just is given to the Kohen. Rabbi Shmuel, B'saram Dahanach Bechoros Kamar. So ultimately, Rabbi Shmuel ultimately says, from B'saram, from these Bechoros, it is being said. But my kamiflagi, what are they arguing about? So I'll say, I just want to point out something very interesting. This is where Bechar is somewhat unique. Because remember again, Bechar is Kadshim Kalim, but there's a unique aspect of Bechar, which is, in the event that the Bechar is blemished, the Kohen still gets it. Right? You would have thought that because it is in the carbonic family, if it's offered up as a carbon, the Kohen gets to consume part of it. But if it's not offered up as a carbon, the Kohen doesn't get it. Kamash Malan, if it's blemished and can't be offered up as a carbon, ultimately, again, the Kohen will still get it. Interesting. The Gemara says as follows. Again, we're going to see this piece a little bit more. So, Micah, what are they arguing about? So now it turns out that there's a bit of an exegetical machlokes over here. What's the exegetical machlokes? Shabbos say, if you have something that is partially learned out from a hekesh and partially learned out from a pasuk, does that exegetically have the status of a hekesh or not? Shabbos, you'll say to yourself, who cares? Now, why does it matter, Abosai? Because remember, again, going back to this idea that something that is learned out from a hekesh cannot serve as the source of a hekesh. So remember, we had this before. If B is learned out from A by means of a hekesh, then B cannot serve as the hekesh for C. So therefore, Abosai, the shaila over here is, if you have something that is partially learned out from a hekesh and partially learned out from a pasuk, as what's been happening over here, like we just saw by Bechar, can that serve, does that have the status of a hekesh or not? So the Gemara's Marsavar, Hemen over Davar Acher have a hekesh. One says yes, something that's partially learned out from a pasuk and partially learned out from a hekesh is called the hekesh. Or Marsavar lo have a hekesh. And one says no, it's not called the hekesh. So let's go weiter. Bishman lamandamar lo have a hekesh. So according to the opinion that says that's not called the hekesh. Hanu dichsiv v'chein yaseli o amoed. Ultimately, that's how the pasuk says. So shall you do in the o amoed kishem shemaza. Lifnai v'lifnim achas lamala v'shev lamata. So the boss said this is by the karbanos of Yom Kippur. Let's say the para of Sar of Yom Kippur. The same way in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you do one blood application above and 7 below. Midam par from the blood of the par. Kach mazeh beheichal. Same thing with the blood applications that you do in the base of Mikdash itself in the heichal, outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim towards the curtain. Ukishim shelifnai v'lifnim achas lamala v'shev lamata. And the same way in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you do one blood application above, 7 below. Midam hasoyer, from the blood of the soyer, kach mazeh beheichal. So to you do in the heichal as well. Elaman the Amar have hekish, but according to the opinion that says that such a limud is called the hekish, ma'ika lemera. What is they to say? To which the Gemara says, you're right. Makomos hu the gamri mehadadi. They're not learning out per se all of the details of the blood applications. Rather, they're just ultimately again learning out. The second hekish ultimately is just a locational hekish and not a detail hekish. I will say I'm a base. The other possibility is chutz mifnim b'chad zimna gamer, or one possibility is it's all one hekish, and ultimately again the halacha is that the blood applications on the outside over here means in the mikdash itself, are being learned out from the blood applications inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So quickly, we'll say bishnon lemanda amar have hekish. According to the opinion, so again, right now the Gemara did a significant exegetical detour. I mean, who doesn't love exegetical detours, right? But that's the most what's happening. So all we're just asking over here is just getting caught up in a bit of a technicality, which is if you have something that is learned out from a combined limud, partially pasuk, partially hekish, does that limud have the status of a hekish or not? The nafkamino will be, can you then use that to learn another hekish? So we're just looking to Yom Kippur for that. So Gemara says, Bishtal Laman Damar have a hekish. According to second both side, 57b, second line. Bishtal Laman Damar have a hekish. Hainu dichsev mimoshvosechem tabiu lechem tenufa. Suppose according to the opinion that says something partially learned from the pasuk, partially learned from a hekish, has the status of a hekish. That's why it says mimoshvosechem tabiu lechem tenufa. Now, what is that talking about? If you look at Rashi, Rabbi say, Rashi's in the short lines, like punt in the middle of the short lines. The first word on Hainu dichsev mimoshvosechem gabe shtei lechem datzeres. So I'll say this is talking about again the offering, the karbanos, ultimately again of Shavuos. Ksiv v'tzrachnu ma'asachas menachos l'mol mehem kama esronos yesh balach meitoda ubagufa nichtav yud chalos. So we'll say to this by the loaves of Shavuos. Ultimately, again, by Lachmei Toda, it says ultimately again 10 chalos. Remember again, you bring 40 loaves by a Toda, four different categories of loaves, 10 of each type. Avalon isparesh mikama hiachala. Now, here's what's interesting. Here's what's very interesting. Ultimately, again, by the shtei alechem, by the two loaves of Shavuos. So the Torah tells me ultimately again, it's one isaron per loaf. So the Torah tells me how many loaves and how much each loaf is. Interestingly enough, by Toda, the Torah tells me the number of loaves, 40 loaves, 10 loaves from each different type, but what? Doesn't tell me how much flour in each loaf. In each loaf, okay? So just hold on to that for just, the Gemara says. So now back to the Gemara for just a second. B'moshosechem taviu lechem tenufa. Shein tam lomar taviu. Why does the Torah have to say taviu? Why to say taviu? So we'll say, so remember again, this is, right, so why taviu? Makom taviu, kol sha'ata mevi mimakom lemakom echad at, kol sha'ata mevi mimakom acher harehu kazeh. So we'll say to teach us that whenever you bring loaves, they are like this one. What's this one? It's the shtei halachem by Shavuos. Shtei halachem by Shavuos. Ultimately, again, 2 loaves and isaron each. Whenever you bring loaves are always 1 isaron each. So therefore, we'll say, what does this teach me? Ma lahalon isaron lachala. Just like by Shavuos, it's 1 isaron per loaf. Afkan, so too by Toda, isaron lachala. Each loaf is going to be 1 isaron. Now, interestingly enough, by Shavuos, that gives you a total of what? 2 esronim. Why? Because remember, by Shavuos, what do you have? Shtei alechem. You have 2 loaves for a total of 2 esronim. Afkan shnei esronim. So I say like this: maybe what we learn out by Shavuos, maybe by Shavuos we learn out not that it's 1 isaron per loaf, but maybe by Shavuos, what do I learn? That halacha l'maisa, it's a total of 2 esronim. Maybe that's what it's saying. And just like halacha l'maisa by Shavuos is a total of 2 esronim, so too by Toda it's a total of 2 esronim. Now, what would that mean? By Toda, what would that mean? That would mean 40 loaves comprised of a total of 2 esronim. Very, very small loaves. Talmud lomar tihiyana. Ultimately, again, the pasuk says tihiyana. No, they shall be. V'lamadnu asar l'chametz asar l'matzminai. So therefore, I will say tihiyana teaches me that. Listen to this. From the shtei alechem of Shavuos, we learn that whenever you bring a loaf, ultimately, again, a loaf is always a minimum of 1 isaron. And then we take that and ultimately, again, we apply it to Toda and say that Toda is 40 loaves. How much ultimately, again, for each loaf? 1 isaron. 1 isaron per loaf of the Toda. Tiyana. Incredible. V'lamadnu asar l'chametz asar l'matzminai. And how do I know, ultimately, again, that there are 10 loaves of chametz, 10 loaves of matzah? Talmud lomar al chalos lechem chametz. Neged chametz have a matzah. So whatever number of chametz loaves you're going to bring the same number of matzah loaves. So in other words, I have 4 categories of loaves, and each of those loaves have the same number. But according to the opinion that says that it's not a hekish, if it says something partially learned, ultimately again from a pasuk, if something is partially learned from a hekish, partially learned ultimately again from a pasuk, it's not called the hekish. So what is there to say? Taviu yiserahi. There's an extra taviu. So fine, extra machlokes, but an interesting nugget of information, I will say, that again, by Shavuos, you have 2 loaves that are brought, those are called the shtei alechem. By Karban Toda, 40 loaves. In those 40 loaves, ultimately, again, are 10 loaves of 10 loaves of 4 different types. Shtei halechem teaches me that whenever you bring a loaf, the amount of flour used in the loaf is an isaron, and that becomes a paradigm. Whenever you bring loaves are made up of an isaron. Incredible. Rabbi say, final piece to the parak. Rabbi say, if you remember again, what did the Mishnah say? Interestingly enough, as much as Karban Pesach is part of Kachim Kalim, and as much as Kachim Kalim, normally again, what's their window for consumption? Normally, 2 days and 1 night. Because remember again, Rabbi say, if you think about it, in that category you had Bechar, Meiser, and Pesach. So remember again, Bechar, Meiser, that is 2 days and 1 night. I might have thought Pesach is the same. Kamash on the Mishnah says no. Pesach can only be consumed when? Now, interesting enough, Pesach is the Karban that has the shortest window of consumption. Because remember again, what's the window of consumption for Karban Pesach? Essentially, it's Tzeisak Kochavim until Chatzos. It's not even the whole night, right? You don't even have until the next morning. You only have until midnight. Shortest window of consumption by a Karban. So the Gemara says as follows, Mantana, who is the opinion that says that you can only eat Karban Pesach until Chatzos, until midnight? Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. What does he say? Disanya, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Omer, Ne'emar kan balayla hazeh, v'ne'emar lahalon v'avarti b'eretzayim balayla hazeh. It says by Karban Pesach that you shall eat Karban Pesach balayla hazeh on this night. And it says, by Makas Bechoros, death of the firstborn, the 10th plague, v'avarti b'eretzayim balayla hazeh, I will pass through Egypt on this night. Ma lahalon ad chatzos, Afkan ad chatzos, just like Makas Bechoros was at night, so too again, was at midnight, so too you can eat Karban Pesach until midnight. And by the way, the Marshal points out, it's not a good comparison. Why? Because ultimately, again, Makas Bechoros, it's midnight. What happened at midnight? What happened at midnight? The Makkah started at midnight. Yet we're comparing Karban Pesach to Makas Bechoros to say, just like Makas Bechoros started at midnight, what do we say about Karban Pesach? What do we say about Karban Pesach? You have to conclude it by midnight. Okay, so it's the detail, right? But Lamaisa, point over here is we're comparing Karban Pesach to Makas Bechoros. Just like Makas Bechoros is at midnight, so too Karban Pesach must conclude by midnight. That is the position ultimately, again, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Kiva says, 1 second, but that's not true. The pasuk says about Karban Pesach, you have to eat it with haste. Right? Chipazon means with haste. Interestingly enough, this is one of the interesting differences. The Rosh in Maseches Pesachim brings down 10 differences between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Doros. The Pesach they observed in Egypt and the Pesach for future generations. One of the interesting distinctions was Pesach and Mitzrayim, they had to eat their Karban Pesach with their masnechem chagurim, which literally means they had to eat Karban Pesach with their loins girded. My favorite biblical phrase that no one knows what it means, right? But whatever it is, it sounds chashiv, right? They had to have their loins girded. It also sounds very uncomfortable, right? But lamaisa, right? Whatever it is, which also means they had to wear their shoes. They had to have their, what it means is they had to be ready to travel. They had to wear their belt. They had to be ready. So again, Rabbi Akiva says that ultimately, again, v'achaltem also b'chipazon. You have to eat Karban Pesach with haste. Now, what does that mean? Rabbi Akiva darshans ad shas chipazon, until the time of haste. Now, we'll say, what was the time of haste? Until the morning. Because remember again, when did we leave Mitzrayim? We left Mitzrayim in the morning, right? We didn't leave at night. We left in the morning. So Rabbi Akiva actually paskins that you're allowed to eat Karban Pesach until when? Until dawn. Shas chipazon. Rashi says over here, it's about 7 lines up from the end of Rashi. Shas chipazon, shem nispazim, shem nechpazim laleches, v'hainu la'arboker, kidichsiv, v'atem lo seisu ishmi pesach beiso ad boker. So Rabbi Akiva says again, we're allowed to eat Karban Pesach until the time that we left, right? And that, when did we leave? We left in the morning. If that's the case, then why does the pasuk say that you should eat Karban Pesach at night? The Gemara says, because we'll say, I'll tell you why Balayla. Balayla teaches me something different. You might have thought that since Karban Pesach is part of the construct of Kachim Kalim, again, we'll say in general, Karbanos 101. If you shech the Karban, when are you allowed to eat that Karban? When are you allowed to eat the Karban? That day. That's the way it works with every single other Karban. If you shecht it during the day, which is when the only time you allowed to shecht Karbanos, you can eat it that day. I might have thought Karban Pesach is the same thing. Talmud Lomar, Balayla. Therefore, the pasuk says Balayla. You can only eat it by day, at night, and you cannot eat it by day. So we'll say it's a very peculiar aspect of Karban Pesach. So Rabbi Akiva says, Balayla teaches me that halacha lamaisa, you could only begin to eat that karban at night. You're not allowed to eat it by day. Rabbi Akiva says, but you are allowed to continue to eat it until dawn. So fundamental machlokes, Amar li Abaye, my Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah udaraisa, tilma v'dirabon l'harchik min ha'aveira. Maybe they're not arguing. Maybe Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah agrees with Rabbi Akiva that really halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and eat Karban Pesach until when? Until when? Until the next morning. So why does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say until chatzos? Why? Laharchik adam min ha'aveira. First Mishnah and Maseches Brachas. Right? That sometimes, even though you're allowed to do something until the morning, Chazal said only do it until midnight to give you a buffer. People always push the envelope on everything. We're always running late. We're always bumping up against the time. So therefore, even though you have until dawn, just tell people until midnight. So maybe they're really agreeing. And midarais, you can eat until morning, but midrabanan, we tell you to stop by midnight. Im came, my ella ad chatzos. That's not the lashon of the Mishnah. The lashon of the Mishnah, if you look at it, is v'apesach inonechal ella balayla v'inonechal ella ad chatzos. Ella ad is a strong lashon, which means no, you must conclude your carbonic consumption by chatzos, which indicates to us that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is talking on a da'araisa level. Kiyasa mahasam da'araisa afkan midaraisa. Sefer Rabbi Elazar, the Gemara says that the lashon of ela ad chatzos lashon of da'araisa. Sefer Rabbi Elazar, it turns out this is so riveting. Turns out that halacha l'maisa, there's a fundamental machlokes midaraisa between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah about the window of consumption for Karban Pesach. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah literally says up until chatzos, and Rabbi Akiva says until the next morning. You both say, how do we paskin? So the Rama paskins in Hilchos Karban Pesach, Perek Ches, Halacha Tes Zayin, that Halacha L'maisa, K'vavanu B'kav Mekomos, Shein HaPesach Nelcha Ela Ad Chatzos, Kedei Laharchik Min Ha'avera, V'din Torah, Sheyochal Kalalayla Ad Shial Mulashach. The Rama paskins like Rabbi Akiva, that me'ikra din, you are allowed to eat Karban Pesach until dawn. But halacha l'maisa, we say finish it by chatzos. Why? Laharchik adam min ha'aver. In order to go ahead and keep a person from violating, we tell you to finish up ultimately again by chatzos, by midnight, in order not to chas v'shalom transgress. So both say, Hadron alach esim, come on. Mazel tov shkayach, everyone. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day.
Must have had good watches.
Zevi, I like the sukkah better. Tomorrow back in the sukkah. Good morning. Good. Thank you again for everything.